Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Happy Mum, Happy Baby, the podcast. Now, a previous guest, Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, has just launched her new campaign, the Shaping Us campaign, designed to highlight the fundamental importance of early childhood from pregnancy to age 5 in shaping the adults that we become. And I'm proud to be supporting this campaign. We heard her talk about her passion for early years back in 2020 at the very start, and to now see what it's become is truly magical. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Guddi Singh, a paediatrician who knows a lot about our brains and about our early development. Hi, Doctor. Hi.
Oh my gosh, hello. It's so nice to be here with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Before we get talking about early years and about how special our brains are at that point, the Princess of Wales gave a speech this week, and we're very lucky because we've got a little clip of it right now to listen to.
Shaping Us is a long-term campaign, and we're starting by highlighting how we develop during early childhood and why these years matter so much in terms of shaping who we become. As the campaign progresses, we'll explore in more depth the importance of a child's social and emotional world, the significance of relationships, and the impact of the surroundings and experiences a child is exposed to during these formative years. Together, these play a key role in shaping our future lives, yet they rarely get as much focus as our physical health and cognitive development.
Fantastic to hear from the Princess of Wales there. We actually talked about this campaign many moons ago when she was on the podcast. So it's fantastic to see what she's doing with it now. But Dr. Singh, can you tell me, why is this topic so important?
Well, I could just say it's my job and it has to be important.
I hope you're passionate about it, because if not, you chose the wrong profession.
I know, you've got the wrong person, I'm sorry. Okay, jokes aside, obviously I'm a massive advocate for this stuff and for the early years. And I have to say that I don't think that we talk about children and families enough in this country.
Do you think it's because, generations ago, it used to be very much a thing of the children are seen but not heard? Like they weren't allowed to really be anything other than there.
Totally. And I think it's a cultural thing, right? You can see it in different countries where actually it's very different. Like a lot of southern Mediterranean countries, for instance, where kids are just basically everywhere. And I mean like...
the total opposite.
Meaning literally like having tapas in the middle of the night, like they are everywhere. And other cultures, which are perhaps, a bit more reserved or just have different ideas about what childhood should be. And you're right, this idea that children, I don't know, that they need to be quiet and they shouldn't be, as you said, they shouldn't be heard. I mean, that's just one of the saddest things in the world to me, because I think kids are fun, which is, kind of obvious that since this is my job. But, I think that the thing that's really interesting about all of this is that obviously as a paediatrician, and I happen to specialize in neurodevelopment particularly. So yeah, you're right. Brains is my thing. But the reason I'm interested in all this, Giovanna, is because the human brain is literally mind-blowing. And the best place to see that in action is in a baby.
Really?
It doesn't even matter how many times I've seen this, but and actually, I don't actually have my own children, but I don't think it matters whether you do have kids or not. We should all be interested in early brain development, because actually it gives us the glimpse of the amazing processes that make us who we are.
Yeah, and I guess that's a massive theme of the campaign, really, because it talks about how actually everyone within the community has a role in shaping who we become.
Oh, totally. And again, I think there's this unspoken thing in our society and our culture, which is that it's basically left up to the parents.
Yeah.
Whoever they are, whether it's mum, dad, both of them. But that's a bit of a lonely place to put parents, isn't it? If you think about it. And you obviously know this yourself.
Yeah, but we hear the saying, it takes a village, but then asking for that help, it's not always, you can often, I think in our culture, feel like a failure for reaching out and asking for support or saying, I'm struggling.
Totally. And, as a paediatrician, I have seen this all the time. And what's really interesting is that when you're in a situation, for many reasons, where parents don't feel like they can ask people for help, they end up pitching up in A&E. And then they ask me for help, and I told you, I don't have kids. So you're asking the wrong person, except that they're not, and at least there is something that I can do. And the thing that I can do for people like that, Giovanna, is sit them down, give them a cup of tea, give them a hug, and just tell them it's okay. It is okay to feel like this is all a bit much.
Yeah.
It's okay that you don't know what you're doing, because none of us do. None of us are taught how to be parents. And it's okay if you're tired and you feel like you're at the end of your last wits. The good thing about the NHS is that the doors are always open.
Yeah.
And, as long as I'm around, then there'll always be a cup of tea waiting for you.
I want to go to whatever hospital you work in. So tell me, in simple terms, what happens with brain development in those first 5 years, and why are those first 5 years so important? Why is the focus on that in this campaign?
Well, so... oh gosh, where do I even start with this? I mean, you can tell that I love this topic. But, babies' brains are literally fizzing with activity. For instance, did you know that by the end of the first year in life, the brain has literally doubled in size, with billions of brain cells being connected in that time? Now, what I always like to do is try and help you to picture all this. Giovanna, if you were to peel away your skull, and this is while you're developing, what you would see is nerve cells growing out and connecting and branching through your brain like a tree before your very eyes. And if you see the kind of imaging that we've got now, it is just incredible seeing this happen. And this ability to grow and to change in response to the experiences that we're having, that's something very specific, and it's called neuroplasticity. And the reason I mention that is because that is the foundation of how we build all of our skills as we get older. And we actually have that ability all through our lives, but you never have it in as much abundance as in those first few years of life. And that's why there's this emphasis on the early years, because that ability to change and to grow and to lay down all of those foundations for everything that we do, it all happens in those first 5 years. And that is the time when I get the pleasure of feeling like I can actually impact young people's lives. I mean, one of the reasons why I do paediatrics, other than playing with toys and watching Frozen over and over again, is because I get to feel like I can have a massive impact on someone's life, because what I do in those early years really can change the trajectory of where people can end up.
Really? Is that significant?
It really is that significant. And what I think, is so important about what the Royal Foundation is doing with this campaign and this work is that they have highlighted that actually in our country, we have ignorance around this issue. So few people, even parents, appreciate just how important those first few years are. Mm-hmm. That thing we talked about, children being seen and not heard. Along with that is this idea that, and this is horrible, but almost like children are dumb, almost like, you can just plonk them here and they can just get on with something. Even tiny babies who, fair enough, they can't talk to you, but they are incredible sensing machines.
They're like little sponges.
Yes, they're absolutely like sponges, and they're picking up everything around them, right? You might not be able to tell, but they are learning every second that they are alive. And so once you start realizing that what you're dealing with is a beautiful, intelligent creature, which is ready to be shaped, suddenly it kind of makes it all very different and a little bit exciting, because suddenly then as a parent, I mean, you have a lot of power. And of course, at some level that can feel like it's daunting and it's, a lot of responsibility. But it's also a beautiful thing, because it means that, you as a human being are able to impart all of the learning, all of the wisdom, even if it's just a little bit, to someone else. And that's one of the most amazing things we can do as human beings, is to engage in that process of passing on what we have in our brains to the next generation.
And how do we look at that? Because I can remember when Buzz, my eldest, was about 8 weeks old, and my husband came back. He'd read something in the National Geographic, actually, about, I think it's neurological pathways is the phrase. And he was telling me, every second this is happening and like the tree. And he was like, so, we really need to think about what we're doing with him. So that night I enrolled us in 4 separate classes, which was great for him. But it actually put loads of pressure on me as a mum, because I was like, okay, so on Mondays we have to go this and we have to do that, and then kind of juggling that whole thing, which probably it didn't help us in terms of our bond, because I was then really worried about what the other mums were seeing when I was sort of struggling and stuff, and unable to work out what my baby needed, because I felt like we were in this room to learn, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's such an interesting experience. I think it's obviously you're not the only one who's been through that. There is a lot of pressure, isn't there, in our society on parents, and a lot of shaming and blaming, let's be honest. You can never be a good enough parent. Either you're neglecting them or you're doing too much and you're kind of forcing stuff down their throats. And, what's the happy medium? Where's the place that we actually want to be?
Yeah.
Look, I think the reassuring thing is, I always think this when I think about my own parents. I mean, look, it doesn't really matter. You kind of end up all right, don't you? But I mean, what I mean by that is that actually when you think about the whole, immensity of human history and also all the different cultures out there and also all the different kinds of conditions that people live in, humans are incredibly resilient. And the reason that the Royal Foundation campaign about the early years is so important is because, as I said, neuroplasticity means that our brains can always change. There's always the ability to change, to grow, to develop. And that means that it's never too late. We can always try and make sure that the next thing is better, that the next thing will be nourishing. And that's why, even children who have grown up in very difficult circumstances, we shouldn't write them off.
Yeah.
Not at all. What we can then do if we know what's happening is try and address some of that inequality and try and make up for it in lots of different ways. And there are lots of programs around the country which are doing exactly that. But, for parents out there who may have just resonated with your own story, I think don't sweat it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the simple, basic things that are more important than necessarily the specifics of the class that you're taking them to, or the kinds of thing you're doing. I mean, you were doing it with the best intentions.
Expose him to everything because the trees are growing.
I mean, I'm sure there is a massive forest in there now.
But the other thing I think is, I can remember when the princess was on recording the podcast, she said that with all of her research, if she could go back and do it all again, even from birth, even from pregnancy, she would have changed how she did certain things. And so for lots of people who are now, I've got an 8, a 6 and a 4-year-old. So, if there are certain things with my 8-year-old, it's not beyond, help now. I'm still shaping. It's just that this campaign is focusing on the 0 to 5s because that is when the brain is, creating more of those pathways.
Totally. And I think it's, I'm a pediatrician. I also have a bit of a public health background. And in terms of thinking about where can you have the biggest bang for your buck? Start early, always start early, right? And it's so much easier to prevent than it is to cure ultimately. And so why not, if you know what to do, just do it. Start doing it as soon as you can. Look, the science tells us that the first few years of life are the most important for all of the things we talked about, social, emotional, intellectual development. But the other reason why it's really important to try and do this stuff early is because if that stuff isn't in place, if we don't make sure that early development happens in a healthy way, the implications are actually further down the line. And I know that as a pediatrician because I see the bad consequences of things later. And, people don't know this, but early development has implications for things like whether you'll get heart disease later on or stroke or diabetes.
Really?
Or even things like cancer. And that's not a connection we make very often. And of course, people may think about things like, the brain and how intelligent you are, and maybe, that kind of thing. But it has much wider ramifications than that. And I care about this campaign because we need to change the way that we think about this. It's important for all sorts of reasons. And if we neglect the early years, my fear is that we're basically sitting on a ticking time bomb of public health problems that are to come, when these children grow up. And that's terrifying to me.
And we've seen, we talk a lot more now about mental health. With that, how does this whole, how do early years and our relationships within that, how does that have an effect on our mental health later on?
Oh, that's a brilliant question, Giovanna. Again, something that we don't make the link with. So the early years are important for our mental health because actually we develop these really elementary skills in terms of how to be a human in that time, in that period. And they're really simple things. Like if you just think actually what happens in the first few years of life, what you are doing is you're going from being this creature that was previously obviously within a whole other being, the mother, and then becoming a whole separate individual. And, the goal of development is to become an individual who is independent and able to live their lives on their own. But you never live alone, right? We're completely social creatures. We live in families and communities. And so therefore, our survival is dependent on relationships and being able to interact with each other properly. And so the things that happen when we are in those first few years of life is understanding things like how to interact with the world, emotional regulation, things like empathy, even simple things like conversation and like turn taking. And, knowing when, it's somebody else's turn to talk, which I'm probably guilty of right now. or even things, and this is like, even things like love and understanding what love is. And that thing that people may have heard of called attachment, which is a very important psychological concept in early development. But these are all the things that are set in place in those first few years. And in a way, I say to parents, what you should think of this as is that you're basically giving your kids the tools that they will need in order for them to then go out and do whatever it is that they want to do with those tools later on. You can't dictate how their lives will end up, and you can't dictate what they do with those tools, but you can give them the tools and show them how to use them well. And that's what the early years is all about.
Is there also something, do you think, when a child is learning and using those tools at a young age, they're generally with people who really love them and they're generally with their primary caregivers? Is there something to say for that, experiencing things in a controlled environment with people that love you versus in the wide world?
As long as you have been growing up in a loving environment and that there is good attachment, that is the basis for you to be a strong, resilient person out there in the world. Even if it's people you don't know, even if it's like a challenging situation, there's something about having a strong attachment bond, which means that you are then the kind of person who's able to go out and explore with confidence. Because ultimately, all of those skills and those tools that I was talking about, the reason that you want to develop them is because ultimately, you want to be able to leave the safety of your little home nucleus, your little family, and go out there and be, as I said, your own person, you're independent. And that often means like literally on your own, right?
Yeah.
And so the important thing is that if you have grown up in a loving environment where you know that there's always a safe place to come, then you can be adventurous. But it's really hard to be adventurous if you don't feel safe in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Then your inclination will be to hide and to maybe react badly if somebody challenges you or if they, if things don't work out your way. And that's where mental health problems can often arise.
And that's fascinating. When it comes to attachment, I feel like attachment also, in some ways, attachment has become a dirty word. In that way of people kind of go, well, they're too attached. Is there such thing as being too attached in those early years?
Well, look, I have a motto, which is that hugs will save the world. And I say that with all seriousness because I genuinely believe that you cannot love too much. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you can't spoil someone. You can definitely spoil people and you can spoil kids for sure, but you can't love too much. So no, essentially, you shouldn't be afraid of being attached. Being attached is a really beautiful, wonderful thing. You should be able to be attached, but also to let go, both the parent and the child.
Yeah.
So there has to be this ability to kind of, a bit like a magnet, you can come together, but you need to be able to be pulled apart. And that is a healthy relationship. That's healthy attachment. If it's too strong, such that you can't be pulled apart, then that's not good for either side, is it? And so that's maybe where we kind of get these associations of like, I guess when I was growing up, it would be things like, you're a mummy's boy or whatever. And that's, it's just really cruel to say things like that. There can't be anything more beautiful than being a son who wants to hug their mum, right?
Yeah. I've got to say, it's only with my third that the old "do you need a hug" works when he's having a moment, when he's feeling some big feelings, it's only with him that those words help. And I can remember the first time I tried it, you know, he was having he was upset about something, and I said, "Oh, do you need a hug?" He went, "Yeah." And he just stopped completely what he was doing. Everything just melted away. And I just thought, oh my gosh, why didn't I try that with the others? Why, you know, why didn't it work with the others? Because with him, it completely just takes him out of that situation and just, yeah, it all kind of dissolves.
You know, that's such a gorgeous story, because I think that's often what we want as adults too, right?
When everything's really overwhelming, just someone hug me.
Yeah. And I think what's really lovely about what you've done there, Giovanna, is that you've taught your son that it is okay to say, I'm feeling lonely, sad, helpless, and that all I want right now is love.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe all of the problems that we have in the world right now are to do with individual personalities who, for whatever reason, didn't know how to do that. And then, you know, they lash out, or they then start behaving in odd ways, which ultimately arise in this issue of just not knowing how to deal with their own emotions at a basic level.
Yeah.
Whereas your son has been, you know, been beautifully modeled how, like, you know, sometimes things will feel a bit much, but that's okay, because there is somebody there who loves you and who can, like, see you through. And okay, they might not be able to take the issue away.
Yeah.
But at least you're not going through it alone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When the Princess of Wales first launched her early years campaigns years ago, when she first started really telling everyone that she was passionate about it, she launched with 5 big questions. And one thing that stood out in my mind about it was that she wasn't saying she just wanted to hear from parents. It was from everyone within the community. So with that, how important is everyone else? You know, we have that whole thing of it takes a village, but if anyone's listening who has children or doesn't have children but wants to know what impact they have, you know, how can they help shape little minds?
Wow, again, such an important question and a massive question. And I think part of it is just, well, awareness for one, and obviously this campaign is part of that. But what do you do with that awareness? You know, now that you know, for instance, that, you know, the early years are important, what can we all be doing? I think about the parents that I see in my practice, and, you know, parenting is hard at the best of times, but parenting becomes even more difficult at the time that we're living in right now. So we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Inequalities are sadly just widening as opposed to getting narrower. And people are really struggling for basic things like food and housing and energy, all of the things that we want to be able to give our children, right? And so, you know, again, I when I put myself in my patient's shoes, I just cannot imagine how desperate some of them are. So one thing we can do as a society is just have some compassion about that kind of desperation. But also maybe we could be thinking again as a society, well, how do we avoid this kind of situation in the first place? You know, how do we how did we come to a point where parents feel that desperate? No one should, right? And if we were treating it more like a village, maybe we would be helping each other a bit more. Maybe we would be reaching out and connecting a bit more. I think one of you mentioned the big 5 questions in that survey. One of the things that really struck me, and I don't think I really appreciated until they did the survey, was just how much judgment parents feel, you know, how much shame there is amongst all of this. And I think what we can be doing as a society together, again, is just stop being so judgy. Like, who are we to say and comment on how anyone is parenting anybody? You know, it's difficult. Every family is different, and they all have their own circumstances to deal with. So I think, quite apart from anything else in terms of, like, how can we make society better, let's just be better human beings to each other, and let's just be supportive and just think, look, how can I help that family who might be having a bit of trouble right now, whose parents are just at their wits' end? What can I do to help? But one of the things that I have been thinking about is that, you know, we should be thinking, whatever our job is, whatever our place of influence might be, there might be a way for you to make things better for parents or make things better for kids. So I've often fantasized about taking over a little town or a little, like, shopping center, and just thinking, actually, if we made this all about the kids, what would it look like? And I don't know who's listening here, but if you are the person who owns a business or you happen to have that kind of power, you might want to think, actually, do I provide the people who work for me with enough time off, or a place to do breastfeeding if they want to do that, or a place for them to bring their kids because they actually can't leave them with the childminder or whatever, today. Are there ways for us to all make small changes in whatever place that we are to just make it a bit easier to have a kid, quite frankly? Having a kid shouldn't be a burden.
And is it that simple thing of putting those things in place to help the caregivers, whether that's a mum, a dad or a carer? It eases things for them, which ultimately has an impact on their mental health and the way and has an impact on how they then parent.
Oh, totally. And that is one of the important things that this campaign links, right? It's not just about the babies. It's not just about their brains. It's about the parents too, right? Mm-hmm. And being a parent, like I've said, is one of the hardest jobs that anyone can do.
Yeah.
It's one of the most important jobs that anyone can do. And therefore, we need to support parents, because even if you don't have a child or have no intention of having a child, what you do want is to have a healthy, effective, productive workforce. Mm-hmm. And even if you put it down to cynical terms like that, what we then need to do is make sure that every child in this country has the opportunity to grow up healthily and happily. And that's why it matters, right? That's why this is so important. And therefore, it's why all of us can be thinking about, actually, what's that little extra thing I can do that will make all the difference?
Mm-hmm. With the campaign launching, the Royal Foundation have also launched the Shaping Us film, which we've both seen.
Yeah.
It is absolutely magical, and I urge listeners to go and Google that, Shaping Us campaign, Shaping Us film, because it really does, give a visual of what we're talking about. Obviously, brain development within the 0 to 5 period is really, really important. But what skills are we picking up in that time, and how can we help children develop them?
The beautiful thing about that Shaping Us film is that it kind of conveys the joy that parents get when they see their child go through those different developmental stages, right? And obviously as a parent, what we are aiming for is a child who eventually doesn't need us, ironically. So the skills that we are putting in place in those early years are to do with being able to basically interact in the world. So social skills, so being able to smile at the right time, to be able to look people in the eye, to be able to have a conversation and to know when to take turns. The skills are also about, being a little scientist and learning, the basic physics of how things work, like gravity, or that things will, if you can't see something, they still might exist, that kind of thing. But the other important skills are the emotional regulation, right? And so understanding that, not everything will work out for you, but that's okay. And that we can learn how to soothe ourselves or distract ourselves or to do something else. All this kind of self-care skills I only learned very late in life. But those are the kinds of skills that are the most important to learn, and also and what we do in that time is we also model to our babies and our kids how to be good human beings to each other. So how to be kind, how to love, how to share, how to care for other people. It's amazing how much children pick up from what's around them.
So it's not necessarily about setting up a classroom in the house and kind of going, okay, today we're going to learn about sharing. It's more about modelling, but also seeing what comes up in certain situations and talking about it as it happens. Is that the best way of looking at it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that second approach is much more. Well, first of all, much more realistic, let's be honest.
Everyone with their 2-year-olds right now are going, okay, so.
I mean, look, the thing is that, along with the whole judgment thing, there's, people get judged because they think they're not parenting enough. But like I said before, there's this idea that you might be doing too much. And, if the expectation is that you had to set up a classroom for your own kid, you would never be able to do your own thing or to get to work or whatever. the good thing is that humans are very quick learners, and we do like to observe what others do. And that's almost enough for us to kind of figure it out. What I think is important to understand about the way that the brain works is that this whole thing about neuroplasticity and neural pathways that you mentioned as well, those pathways are formed with frequent and repeated practice. So, your babies and your kids, you'll notice that they'll often do things over and over again. And that's important because not only are they getting better at whatever they're doing, they're laying down strong connections in their brain, which if they just did it the one time, it would not last. And it would be almost like they would forget what they had just done. But by doing it again and again, you build up these strong connections which last over time. And that's how you then can move on to the next developmental stage. The good thing about modeling, of course, is that you're doing things unconsciously all the time in the house, right? I mean, you might be saying, hello, thank you, please. Well, hopefully. Or you're just simple things like you might be demonstrating like caring for another child or something like that. All of that stuff is stuff that's being picked up. And the other thing that actually babies, even at a very, very early age, do is that they watch conversations. And if you watch very carefully, they'll be looking from face to face as the conversation is happening, even though they presumably can't understand the words, but they're understanding that it's a to and a fro, a bit like a tennis match, and they're watching the ball being batted from one side to the other. And all you have to do as a parent is just make sure that there are a range of different things that they're looking at and seeing. It doesn't have to be a huge range, but just like a few things. And just make sure that everything that you do with your children is just done with love and care and done intentionally. But even the stuff you're not doing intentionally, they are picking up on, so be careful.
Yeah, and so it's not necessarily even what you're doing intentionally with your child, but around them. You might be thinking that you're having an adult conversation with someone else and that your child, because they're not involved in it, they're not absorbing it. But actually, if they're there, the chances are that they are on some level, taking it in.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Like that shouldn't be a signal to stop talking to your adult friends.
Yeah,
carry on, and show them what adult conversation looks like, and also what you are like in your like adult form, right? They should see mummy and daddy for the brilliant people that they actually are, and not just the kind of baby voice that they normally hear, right? They've got to model themselves on you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What advice would you give for parents who want to know how to support their children's development or who need support at that early age? Where, if people are listening going, well, how do I do that? What do I do? Where's best to start?
It's a really great question because we have a brilliant National Health Service, but services are quite fragmented and not every area has all of the same services available. And so actually it's very difficult to give you generic advice on what anyone should be doing. But always remember that you are not alone. So the important thing is that, there is always somebody to talk to. GPs are having a very hard time at the moment, and it may be difficult to get in touch with them. In the early stages of having a child, obviously there's the health visitor, there's the community midwife, but there's always mental health professionals who can help if you're feeling particularly overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. But for all those people who are in the grey area, the in-between, where it's just kind of like things are just a bit tricky, there are lots of great resources out there. There's actually a fantastic book called There's No Such Thing as Naughty by Kate Silverton. I don't know if you've read it.
No, weirdly, I literally just I ordered it last night. Yeah.
It is actually great. It is really, really, really good. And it's based on lots of really great psychology, science and evidence. But it is about the practicalities of actually raising a child. And so, she uses like examples from her own experiences, which really make her human and actually put you in the position of, whatever situation of the child. And the point being that, there's no right way to parent, but there are some principles that are helpful in all situations. So that's a good book to turn to. There's also some really great websites out there, which I tell the parents that I meet to go to. There's one called familylives.org.uk, which is really good for parents who are struggling with their mental health or who are feeling like things are a bit much and they don't know where to turn. So that's a really good resource. There's also, and I think this is fantastic because, we do we talk to mums a lot, but what about the dads?
Yeah.
There's a website called dadmatters.org.uk, which is all about what men in this situation can do and how they can be thinking about their roles. Often I think dads can feel left out of it all, but there's definitely no need to feel like that at all. And things are changing. And I think this website is really good for any men who might be struggling. And there's also a website on the BBC called the Tiny Happy People website, which is full of really good resources for just things that you can do for development. Actually, I've helped develop some of the videos on there in terms of like speech skills and like playing with your baby. And there's some really simple things that you can do there. But again, there's a really excellent resource for parent well-being and just, again, thinking about yourself. I guess what I'm trying to stress here is that it's not always just about what you should be doing for your baby, but also what you can be doing for yourself.
Yeah.
And always have both of those things in mind. Because as I always say to people, I cannot make your child well if you are not well too. So make sure you take care of yourself and then everything else will come with it.
Parenting is just such a massive thing. And when you think of it in that way, it's bizarre that there isn't more in place when you are expecting. Do you know what I mean? Because we all do the NCT classes or the equivalent, but actually, there's so much focus on the birth, but nothing really beyond that. And I think usually it's when we get ourselves into a little bit of a situation that we turn to books or we turn to websites, which is amazing that they're there. But perhaps there should be something in place before that, which is what hopefully the Shaping Us campaign will help with.
Oh God, I really hope so, because you're right. There's a massive gap in exactly that place. My brother recently had a baby, and we were talking about exactly this gap, right? Which is that, the NHS and, God bless them, the maternity services are really, really interested in you having a healthy baby and a healthy delivery. And then everyone disappears.
Off you go. And then it's picked up again. Oh, yeah, you didn't do that right, actually. What you should have done. Well, why did no one tell me that I should have done that?
Totally. So you're kind of like left in the lurch then. And, like honestly, nobody teaches you how to be a parent. So where are we supposed to learn all of these skills from?
Well, but that's the other thing, isn't it? It's because each child is different. So there's never a one size fits all. So then you get a lot of people being, quite not aggressive, but there's always conflicting conversations going on about what you should be doing. And ultimately, I do think that sometimes makes us switch off from our children and not listen to their needs because we're thinking about Joe Blogs or Joe down the road who are telling us their perfect way of doing things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Giovanna, I've got no time for that. There is no one size fits all parenting like template out there. And neither should there be, right? If we all want, if we all want to be individuals and we want to celebrate that individuality, then why would we want everyone to be parented the same? Like that would just be boring. So yeah, no, absolutely. Like you should celebrate the differences that you have. Again, there are some basic principles, mainly just loving your child, but beyond that, there are all sorts of creative things that you can do. And actually, I think that's what makes parenting, again, it's such a beautiful creative process. Like the thing about the Shaping Us video, what I loved about it, and you can tell me whether you loved it too, was that it kind of had this whole idea that like these babies were being made of clay or like plasticine almost.
The moulding, the shaping.
Yes, exactly. The moulding and the shaping. And I think that is, that is a beautiful thing that parents can feel like they're doing, that they're molding, they're shaping. They can't control entirely what happens at the end, but they can kind of guide in the right direction, right? They can kind of just put a bit of their own themselves in there. Matt
Willis was on the podcast a few weeks ago, actually, and he used a word that I've never heard with parenting before, and that's service.
Oh, wow.
It's a service that you're providing in a way, and actually what a privilege it is to be able to provide that service.
I love that word in relation to children, childhood. And actually that might be the key word for what we should be doing in terms of thinking about the early years, actually. If we all thought of ourselves in service of this really important period, because what we're trying to do is create a happy, healthy generation of human beings, then I think it would change the way that we thought about everything and what our role in all of this was. This idea that, you're in service of producing the next generation. Oh, it's lovely. It's lovely because it's also then not about you, right? It's about this other human.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from the Shaping Us campaign?
I think the biggest takeaway is is that there is this magical period in the first 5 years of life when we are ultimately our most malleable, and we can literally become anything in that time, in that period. And the beautiful thing is that it's a time when we can intervene and put in the right building blocks in place to make sure that humans can be flourishing. And the takeaway is that no matter who you are, you can help children everywhere to benefit from that period if we're just more aware of it. So I think the takeaway is that there is this period of amazingness in all of us as human beings. But the takeaway is also that we need to do more with it, because at the moment, I think that potential is being wasted.
It's really exciting that so much focus is being put on it now with this campaign.
Oh, gosh. And it is definitely well overdue. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the joy of being able to be part of something like this is I get to talk to people like you, but I also get to talk to policymakers or academics, scientists, or people who are running local borough councils, that kind of thing, because all of us have a role to play.
Yeah.
And we all have to just start stepping up ultimately and be in service of the next generation.
Amazing. I end each podcast with you completing 3 sentences. So the first one is being a parent means.
Oh, wow. Being a parent means having the enviable potential to create the most beautiful thing you can ever create, which is your child.
The next one is if I could tell you one thing, it would be.
Oh, if I could tell you one thing, it would be it's not your fault.
I love that. And I'm happy when.
Oh, I'm happy when there are giggles. And by that, I mean particularly children's giggles. There's nothing more uplifting, especially on a night shift, than when children are laughing. I think it's like something we should all record and send to everybody in the country, because I think that would be the cure to all sorts of mental health issues, because there's something just so joyful about children laughing.
That's good to know as well, because I've been at A&E a couple of times. Well, no, one time in particular though, when we thought something was up, and by the time we got to be seen, one of our children was just bouncing on the bed giggling. So it's a good thing that nothing was wrong.
Oh, do you know what? That is how I know when a child is fine. That's what all those years at medical school taught me.
Dr. Guddi Singh, thank you so much. It's been a joy to talk about something that I really believe is going to have a massive impact in the UK.
Oh, thank you for having me, and total pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.